So we come in there and we'll take a look. They're often over-asseted. They have more equipment than they could potentially even use, but it's just not where it needs to be when it needs to be there. And that's where we can come in and help, and where the on-site program that we've talked about or that I mentioned before is a way for that equipment to have that single point of contact that can own the equipment management process from end to end. The one owner that is responsible. So we make sure that the equipment is available, it's clean, it's where it needs to be when the clinicians need it, and that it's efficiently removed from the floors and cleaned and put back into circulation once a patient is done with it.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this Vendor Spotlight, we speak with Jeannie Spoden, Vice President, Medical Technology Management Solutions at Agility. We'll be talking about the demand for equipment at the tail end of this COVID and flu season, as you have likely seen some spikes in respiratory illnesses this year. There has been some changes and market disruption in the respiratory space as well, and we're going to learn all about that as well as Agility's equipment and rental management program as they take a very consultative approach. Nobody better than Jeannie Spoden to talk all about this with us today, so stay tuned. We'll be back after the break.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
Joining me now, Jeannie Spoden, Vice President, Medical Technology Management Solutions with Agility. Jeannie, I'm really excited to have you on the show today. You've got some unique background and experience, and I think everybody who's going to be listening is going to learn a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, great to be here. Happy to join.
So why don't you talk about your background a little
Sure.
bit? Just introduce yourself to everybody.
Sure. I'm Jeannie Spoden. I am Vice President of Medical Technology Management Solutions at Agility. And our business unit, the Medical Technology Management Solutions business unit, focuses on three of our main solutions. It focuses on our peak need rental solution, where we supplement medical equipment into hospitals in times of need. It also focuses on our on-site management programs. So these programs are where we actually have Agility folks, employees that work in the hospital, report there every day, and are fully responsible for the equipment management function within a hospital. So the third portion of the medical technology management world is clinical engineering. So that's the repair and maintenance of medical equipment. So that's where I am today. Really, my role is being a problem solver. So we listen to customers. We understand the needs that they have, the challenges that they have, and then we then make sure that what we're offering to our customers actually solve those problems. My background, kind of leading back into the problem solving piece, has always sort of been in that realm. I started off in the IT space, and I'll date myself a little bit. It was before the word product existed, back when basically we were called business analysts or project managers that sort of worked between the customer and their challenges, and then met those challenges with technical solutions. So it was more around the software development or the problem solving that could be handled with technology. So spent most of my career in that space, ended up joining Agility. At the time, it was Universal Hospital Services back in 2013, and have been in various roles, including the role that I'm in today.
Well, it really takes an entrepreneurial spirit to be a problem solver, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And it's fun. I think it's exciting in that we always see problems as problems, right? But honestly, every problem that a hospital has, someone is coming up with some kind of a solution to be able to help. And I think that's where we get a lot of satisfaction here with the team, is that ultimately what we're doing is helping the acute care hospitals and the customers that we serve.
Well, just some background on Agility for our listeners is that you've been in business for more than 80 years, really around providing medical equipment management and service solutions, supporting clinicians so that they have what they need to do their jobs. And you're supporting over 10,000 plus hospitals around the country. Can you talk a little more about the company? I know I just gave them the demographics, but maybe speak to the value.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we've been around a long time, started over 80 years ago here in Minneapolis, where I'm based and our corporate office is based. Started as just a rental company where the problem we were solving, right, was that customers or hospitals needed more equipment in times of need. They didn't buy as much equipment as they would need during those peak seasons that we talked about. They would buy to a certain level and then supplement through rental. And we were the solution provider for that. Since that time, we have expanded in all sorts of ways. So all things that we offer really do center around the medical equipment space, but have expanded into the surgical space as well. So beyond my business unit that we described before, which again is rental of additional MME and beds into hospitals and on-site managed programs to help the management of devices, either that we own or the customer owns, and then also the repair and maintenance of medical devices. Beyond those, we also have a surgical sort of bent to our offering. One is where we provide the lasers and technician support for surgical cases in hospitals. Sort of you get the tech and the laser. We come in, do the whole thing case by case basis. We also have a surgical equipment repair division where we have mobile vans that can show up at the hospital and repair the critical surgical equipment needed for cases. So those things are sort of the newer adds to our offering, but we've been doing on-site programs for over 25 years. We've been offering clinical engineering for at least that long. So it's a comprehensive sort of one-stop shop when you think about medical equipment and what hospitals need.
You know, it's interesting. You talked about some of the newer additions, but I think about how many stakeholders are involved within the hospital managing all of that equipment. And, you know, you mentioned rentals, but I'll just go ahead and put this in quotes. Who really owns that process to manage all this equipment? Because I'm very familiar with the surgical equipment repair world that you're describing. And you know, sometimes biomed's involved, especially if it's like flexible scope. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's owned by the operating room and sterile processing reports up to them. But it just seems to me like there can be a decent amount of hands that are involved in that. And are they always really clear on like, you know, who's managing like preventive maintenance and all of that?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. And the short answer is really no one typically owns the end-to-end equipment management within a facility. There's a lot of folks. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So for example, you have supply chain or materials management that are responsible for making sure there's enough equipment that has been purchased and available. But then you may also have some folks in a distribution realm. You have clinicians that are doing sometimes parts of the equipment management. You have biomed involved because they have to repair it and make sure that it's ready, and, you know, preventative maintenance to make sure it's patient ready when needed. You also have EVS that's potentially doing wipe downs between patient use. So what we often find, and the reason why folks even call us to talk about their problem, is that no one owns this process and it's broken. And so what happens in a broken equipment management process? We make bad decisions about how to solve it sometimes because there are so many folks that are involved. I'll give you one example, Justin. A lot of times we get called in to talk about the problem from clinicians. So clinicians will say, hey, we're short 100 nurses. They're getting stuck with equipment management. They don't have the equipment they need. We need help. Initially, what usually happens is those cries for help go down to the basement, and the basement hears, hey, I got to buy some more equipment. But in reality, most of the time they don't. So we come in there and we'll take a look. They're often over-acided. They have more equipment than they could potentially even use, but it's just not where it needs to be when it needs to be there. And that's where we can come in and help, and where the on-site program that we've talked about, or that I mentioned before, is a way for that equipment to have that single point of contact that can own the equipment management process from end to end. The one owner that is responsible. So we make sure that the equipment is available, it's clean, it's where it needs to be when the clinicians need it, and that it's efficiently removed from the floors and cleaned and put back into circulation once a patient is done with it.
Yeah. I do feel like sometimes they really, just because there is something that's maybe wrong with the equipment, it needs to be serviced, or there's just nobody really triaging what needs to happen to it. So to your point, they could be over-acided, but they may not have the assets in the right working condition, or it may be kind of hanging out there like, hey, what needs to happen with that? And to your point, nobody owns that to just keep everything moving and that uptime for all the equipment, right?
That's exactly right.
And you said something about, like, definitely our audience is supply chain, and you talked a lot about kind of materials management and their role. And we all know that capital is really a lot more difficult to come by than it used to be. The financial constraints. So the last thing supply chain wants to be doing is purchasing new equipment that ultimately isn't necessary. Like, have you had a lot of conversations around the rental program for that? Or is even just the maintenance piece of what we were just talking about, equipment being down longer than necessary, creating sort of this deficit in meeting the needs of like the surgical cases that are being scheduled? Like, how 360 is that for materials management and supply chain?
It's so impactful. There are so many different processes that impact whether or not the supply chain folks need to spend the capital, right? So for example, you brought up the broken processes of having it available and in working condition. One of the things that we found is that a lot of times we are sending the equipment down to biomed when it doesn't even need to go there, right? And so let's talk about our partners in biomed for just a second. If a piece of equipment we think isn't working because someone tried to use it, oftentimes it gets sent down to the biomed shop to be repaired when actually it was just operator error. So intervening on that piece keeps the equipment in play, right, to make sure that it is functional. It goes back into circulation. Too much of that, right? We might buy more equipment. If the clinicians are saying they don't have enough equipment, oftentimes we have to buy more equipment. If the process is not where we know where things are, right? We're not managing it well, our equipment loss rates go up, right? Maybe they're walking out the door because we're not actively managing that equipment. That causes us to have to consider more capital. And so there's all the things around the management piece that are causing undue capital purchases from supply chain. But beyond that, there's a lot of these market influences that are happening right now. I'll name a couple. In the infusion world, huge infusion provider, as of July of 2023, had some FDA clearance for their new devices. So those folks that use those devices in the hospitals now have to make decisions about capital to either replace them or to upgrade them to meet the new FDA standard. So many hospitals that did not plan to capitalize on infusion are now forced to make those decisions based on things happening in the market. The same thing happens in the respiratory space right now. So the respiratory market is really in a lot of upheaval in that a lot of the large dominant equipment manufacturers have made decisions about whether or not they want to continue to operate in the US market, or if they want to continue to even offer the devices they've been offering. That's resulting also in supply chain needing to understand if they need to put up capital to replace their ventilation fleet. So we're hearing a lot about that.
Is there also going to be a shortage in new equipment? Like, it's not just as in that respiratory space. It's not as easy as just allocating the capital. Like, there may be a shortage of supply as well because everybody's going through that, and the suppliers themselves are backing away from the market. Is that an accurate sort of like concern?
Yeah, it absolutely is. We've had some disruption where some providers have even declared bankruptcy or discontinued certain models and have said, hey, whatever parts are available today is what is available. So it almost creates the fire sale, right? To make sure that you have what you need if you wanted to continue to use those devices. Related to the respiratory upheaval, there are some OEMs that have exited the market that, to that point, the parts may or may not be available in perpetuity. And
for service.
For service, exactly. And so if you can't service it, then you can't really own it. But it varies depending on the manufacturer and what their plans are. So we have been hearing a lot from hospitals and hospital systems saying, hey, we've got a situation here where we're using X ventilator. It's no longer can't get the consumables, or we are worried about parts availability going forward. We're going to have to make some decisions to change the ventilators that we use in our hospital. And to your earlier point about it's just, you don't just call the 1-800 number and get a ventilator tomorrow, right? There are lead times. There are a lot of hospitals trying to make these same decisions and make these same purchases. And so if you're looking at lead times of 60, 90, 120 days in order to get the new fleet of ventilators, is what you have today going to get you through that waiting period? And so a lot of folks are having to look at potential long-term rentals, look at other manufacturers' products that they can use in the interim, which is creating concern, right? Because you have a bunch of clinicians, pulmonologists, et cetera, that know how to use X ventilator, right? And we need to make sure that they know how to use whatever other ventilator is brought into their hospital.
I think another thing, Jeannie, is when you have this kind of disruption in a market, all of a sudden for somebody to really be able to plan and prepare for this, it requires them to become somewhat of an expert in just one single equipment category. And just knowing how stretched supply chain is, that's going to be a tall task. I can imagine they're going to be looking for, experts and partners that can help them navigate this, because who knows what's happening with all the various manufacturers, and keeping an eye on that and being able to be proactive, especially when it comes around to maybe having to invest capital or what their strategy is going to be. I'm sure that that's something that you're very involved in your discussions.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so interesting. It's almost been flipped a bit this year in that it used to be that hospitals would say, hey, we went out and bought the XYZ 2000 piece of equipment. Do you have that in your fleet to be able to supplement what we already own? And we would say yes or no and go on from there. What's happening now with all of the upheaval in the respiratory market, in the infusion market, is the opposite is happening. The hospitals are coming to us to say, we got to make some decisions here, and we have to decide, which horse we're going to put our money on, right? Which OEM should we trust going forward? And we are agnostic, but we do obviously know a lot of the OEMs in play. They want to know what we're investing in and almost purchase to match what we're buying, which is interesting because it never usually works like that. I think what the hospitals are doing is saying, hey, we've got a lot of decisions to make. We've got a lot of capital to invest. And we know Agility's in this world, right? They see this stuff all the time. They're repairing it. They're moving it. They're renting it. We trust what they say and want to understand if they know something that we don't know. So certainly we're not steering any hospital to a certain product. We're not saying, hey, this guy isn't a great way to go. We are just saying that they're, sharing with them what we're seeing in the market, our experience with how things have performed, and keeping it, very fact-based, because we want to share what we know and make sure that we can help them through those decisions that they have to make.
Does it even make sense to expense this on capital, knowing that the market is so volatile and you don't know, to your point, whether or not there's going to be, parts to repair something, because you're expecting when you spend capital that you're going to depreciate that over a certain period of time and then it's going to have long-term value. I think one of the biggest nightmares that could happen to somebody in supply chain is they purchase a piece of equipment that's obsolete in 3 years. I almost wonder if it even makes sense until there's some stability in this market.
Very true. And the dynamic there to not know which OEM to choose or which technology will be best for them, and have all that risk around potential recalls and remediations and the maintenance and the ownership burden. What we're also hearing from hospitals is that they would like us to buy the equipment on their behalf, which we do. So there are plenty of programs we have in place today where the hospital doesn't even own their infusion. We own the infusion, and they pay for that through the program that we have where we're there managing it. We provide the capital and we provide the repairs. So if you think about that model, you don't have to burden your biomed folks with maintaining the lower end equipment, because they would rather work on, and we'd rather have them working right on the revenue generating MRs and CTs and things like that. Takes that burden away from them. It also creates an optimal management program to ensure that the clinicians have what they need, that it's turned efficiently, that there's not a lot of operator error that's causing capital decisions. All of that management helps them sort of be efficient in their processes, all while not having to worry about, what if this gets recalled? How am I going to manage this? It's all part of the program, and almost an easy button for the hospitals to come to us and say, I don't want to take this on. I want you to take it on. And then we're responsible end to end.
Seems like it would be easier to calculate cost per procedure in that model too.
Sure.
Me.
Yep. Yeah. I certainly, on the procedure side, I'm not as obviously clued into the surgical space, so not really my forte to speak on that.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you can have that cost like really sort of flattened out for you and know your procedure volumes. Absolutely. Okay. So we said at the beginning, and speaking of respiratory, it's flu season. So can we tie this into like this disruption in the respiratory market and the need for capital? And, I should say it's not just flu season, it's COVID season. Everybody's getting their vaccines and everything else. And we do know that, people get sick this time of year. It's just what happens. It's the reason that we get inoculated. So how does that tie into the need for equipment and kind of that equipment planning?
Sure. Yeah, it is the busiest time. We're all indoors at this time of year. We're sharing germs. We're getting all these respiratory illnesses that ultimately will lead to increased patients in hospitals. And when there's an increase in the patients in hospitals, there's an increase in the need for equipment to meet their needs. So there's a lot of hospitals that approach things differently, right? There are hospitals that buy a certain amount of equipment and know that it's more effective for them and less expensive for them to just rent to the peaks. So I'll buy 1,000 infusion pumps knowing that it may be in December, January, and February, I need 1,100, but it's way cheaper for me to rent those 100 pumps rather than have them on my books, put up the capital, have to maintain them, etc. So definitely a good strategy that a lot of hospitals employ. Others will have enough equipment to go around, right? And so they will have purchased to their peak, but oftentimes those are the hospitals that will come to us and say, hey, we need help managing this, because it gets to be a lot for them to manage. And as patient census spikes, it's more work on the nurses, it's more work for their own internal staff, and they find it to be a great burden. So we can help no matter what, whether they have enough equipment to go around or if they need supplemental rentals. So it feels good to be, a service provider that can sort of cover all of those needs.
Yeah, you said it's like might be a lot of equipment for them to manage, but then I'm thinking you're centralizing it, so you have a lot of equipment to manage, right? And you're nationwide. So,
right.
I got to imagine this is a pretty big program. Like, do you have any areas in the U.S. that you don't cover, or are you just, full service, across the country?
Yeah, we're across the country. I think the stat, and I hope our marketing team will keep me honest here, I think the stat is that we're within 100 miles of 90% of the acute care facilities in the country.
Wow.
So we are close to the customers who need us. We have hundreds of thousands of pieces of medical equipment that we house within our district service centers that are near these acute care facilities. So it makes it easy for us to go back and forth, to make expedient deliveries, to make expedient pickups, and to have equipment there in times of need.
Yeah, I think I saw that you have over 150 service centers.
That's right.
That really is an incredible footprint.
Yeah, it is an incredible footprint. And the service centers are actually quite fantastic. So if you've ever been into an Agility service center, it's impressive. Everything is visually labeled. Everything is extremely clean. It's bagged. It's sanitary. It's exactly the kind of space that you would expect medical equipment to be in. So they're very beautiful facilities, and again, across the country and strategically placed near the customers who need us.
Yeah, you have good logistics built into that then, and not only are you doing repair and maintenance and rental, but I feel like just in listening to you, is there's a real consultative approach to helping each customer build what fits them versus saying, this is what we do and this is how you fit into it, and kind of take it or leave it.
Completely. Yeah. And especially when we're designing sort of an on-site program for our hospitals. So customers come to us again, we go back to that whole problem solving theme, right? They come to us with whatever that problem is. And rather than just show up and say, hey, we've got this magic on-site program that's going to solve your problems, we then need to do some work to understand the true root cause of the problems so that we're solving it right. We don't just throw people at it, right? We're working with a hospital system out east right now that they came to us. They have multiple facilities. They have no great coordinated equipment management process. And they have a need to recapitalize on their infusion. And rather than just take the infusion quote and say, okay, I'm going to buy 5,000 pumps or whatever it is, they're saying, maybe we should figure out if we can manage these better so we don't have to buy as much, so we can lower that capital burden that's required of us with all this infusion change in the market. So we're actively in there understanding what they do, understanding how they operate, catering our program to what they need to reduce the capital that they need to invest in. So it's a big solve, and the benefit, right? Reduce the amount of capital that you're going to have to buy. And at the same time, what comes with it is this optimized program, the one owner that sees the medical equipment management through, soup to nuts.
Yeah, a real extension of their teams is what it sounds like to me. And it's interesting. I learned as we were kind of preparing for this that UHS, now Agility, really created this space. So I can imagine that over that time, since you are the innovators that brought this model forward, that you spent a lot of time working on quality management systems. And, I think that's always a really important thing to discuss is, sometimes people think rental and they hear used, right? And so I think it's super important to focus on the quality there, because I've definitely worked in the past in the service industry, especially around medical equipment. And I can tell you that if you maintain it well and you have those quality management systems around it, it is fantastic. And so can you talk about the quality that Agility brings to the table?
Sure, absolutely. And to your point, right, we did kind of create this space, the on-site management space, about 25 years ago. And so we still get the question today from hospitals, why can you do it better? Why can't I just hire these folks and have it work like a well-oiled machine? And the answer is they can. But what has to come with it is all of the infrastructure, best practices, and know-how that have been accumulated over those 25 years, right? So do you have the system and the capability to track it? Do you have the best practices that have been tried in hundreds of hospitals nationwide to kind of learn all the nuance that can happen with these things and know how to sort of combat the things that will come up in the equipment management flow? So what we bring is that quality process, the know-how, the data, the analytics, and sort of the consultation on things that matter to the hospital, including, infection prevention. We work with the infection prevention departments to ensure that equipment is not going from patient A to patient B, because that can pose an infection risk to not only staff, but to patients. And we can't afford to do that, right? We also make sure that the equipment is quality equipment. If we're bringing the equipment, we're using only OEM parts to maintain that. We're not taking shortcuts. We're assuming that device is going on our grandmother or our sister or our father, and we're not going to put some, Franken part in that device and then worry about its use on a patient. So there's all of the to your point, the quality components, not only in process, but in the equipment itself, that we're very firm on. We're not budging from that. And sometimes that means that we're not the cheapest guy with the quote, right? But then we ask ourselves, do we want to save money on things that's critical as a function of our equipment management?
Yeah, I love that term, Franken part, because, I think one of the things that's really important is your ISO 13485 2016. That is, a quality management system that I think everybody out there is familiar with. But also coming back to Franken part, I think one of the things that I also appreciated about your model is that you're only purchasing new equipment when you bring it into your inventory. And then that way you have total control over the maintenance from, day one of ownership. And so there's no gaps in sort of understanding what's in that equipment, right? I mean, people don't buy used equipment and necessarily disassemble it down to every piece and then reassemble it to ensure, that it has, it's meeting those standards. Right. And so I think that's really something that really stuck out to me was new equipment from day one, full ownership of the maintenance record from the original point of purchase.
That's right. And that is so important to us. And again, it's why we aren't always the cheapest option at all times. We do try to keep our prices as low as possible, but we are investing in brand new equipment. We are making sure that we're using the parts that will work and that are sanctioned by the original equipment manufacturers. So it's just an extra level of care for our equipment, knowing that our equipment becomes the hospital's equipment in everyday use. So we want to make sure that we are of the highest standard, because then there's no doubt that the equipment we're bringing in is going to meet the customer standard as well, because the bar is high. I don't know of a higher bar.
Yeah, no, that is the bar. I want to talk about this case study. I know we're getting close to the end of the conversation, but before we do, I want to highlight a couple of additional sort of value pieces that come to the table, which is EMR integration. And also we talked about tracking the equipment, and you have a cloud-based equipment management and tracking platform. So maybe speak to those two pieces. And then I'm really excited to highlight the successes of this particular case study.
Sure. Yeah. So part of kind of that know-how, that best practice that we have with our on-site programs is knowing how clinicians or how folks are ordering equipment for patient use, right? And oftentimes it's right there in the EMR that the orders are being placed. So with our on-site programs, we have the ability to integrate with the EMR to get those medical equipment orders directly to our folks that are on site, to bring it as quickly as 15 minutes from order. So it's integrating with the workflows that already exist within a hospital to ensure that we're not just a side process, right? We're not creating a parallel path that isn't efficient and isn't integrated with what folks are already doing. So that's on the EMR side. We do track the equipment. So we talked a little bit earlier about some of the problems of equipment management, and one of them being equipment loss. It's real. You can't imagine the number of pieces of equipment that go down a laundry chute or end up in a trash bin or walk out the front door. And that's real money. That's walking
or
out.
Get walked out the back door. That's right. And that's right. Get found on the black market at some point.
That's exactly
right. That is
right.
Also very real.
Right. And look, look, we can't prevent bad actors all the time, but I can tell you we do reduce equipment loss significantly with our program because we're actively managing it, right? We're touching it all the time and making sure we know where it is. And all of that data, which patient is using it, what room they're in, what equipment they had on that they were using during their stay, is obviously all part of the data package that is included with the program, so that you have the analytics around how things are flowing, how much it's utilized, to make good decisions going forward about what you need to buy, what you need to rent, and what you ultimately need to improve within your own processes.
All right. So speaking of processes, one of the things I love about this case study is it really highlights your process. And we've alluded to it a decent amount. And I think even when I brought up the consultative approach, that's a big part of what I think we see in this case study. But can you kind of talk about this? And I also want to let everybody know that we will have a link for you to download the case study in the description for this episode. So certainly be sure to do that. I love the statistics that are laid out here, but maybe just talk a little bit about the case study and the scenario that you're highlighting.
Sure. So every single program that we start becomes its own case study, right? We go in and there's a problem that we're solving with our program, and we want to understand sort of the current state of that problem. Oftentimes the problems are around nursing satisfaction, or maybe time to delivery, or equipment availability, etc. So we measure all of those things. This particular case study, we did just that, right? We went in, they have problems. The nurses were spending about 45 minutes per shift doing equipment management stuff. So cleaning it, moving it, finding it, stealing it from the other floors in order to get what the patients need. So all sorts of unnecessary time that's spent. You may hear 45 minutes and think, oh gosh, that's not that much. You take a large hospital system, and let's say you have 700 nurses on 3 shifts or whatever it is, and you multiply that by that 45 minutes. Boy, that the time spent and the money being put into the clinicians for unnecessary tasks is crazy, in the millions of dollars. So in this particular situation, those nurses were spending 45 minutes each shift looking for equipment, and we were able to reduce it to less than 15.
That's a huge improvement. I mean, I'm a nurse, and I can tell you, like, it was kind of like a positive that, hey, nurses wear a lot of hats and they can do a lot of different things. But to your point, now with the shortage, there's just a lot of strain on clinicians, and having them performing, the tasks that they were trained to do is more critical than ever. I think, specialization, et cetera. So if you're saving 30 minutes a shift, I can tell you as a nurse, like, if you get behind in your shift, next thing you know, you're sticking around to make sure all the documentation is done, 30 minutes to make sure that's wrapped up before you get done for the day. I can see how there's a stat we're going to talk about here. I can see why nursing satisfaction went up so much.
Exactly. And so as a result, the nursing satisfaction improved to 97% related to equipment management, which is just huge, right? Especially in times of nurse shortages. It's so important to make sure your clinicians, are doing the job you want them to do, which is improving their time at the bedside and devoting their time to patient care. We also reduced the equipment delays. 40% of the time there were delays getting equipment to the clinicians when they needed it, improved to less than 7%, which ultimately improves your speed to therapy, right? So your patient needs something, you're not sitting around, or the patient's not sitting around waiting for that necessary equipment. They get it right away.
That's almost half the time at the start of this that they were experiencing an equipment delay, and to get it to less than 7%. I'm not saying it's negligible. I'm sure they still notice it, near 1 out of every 20 times, but that is an impact on the culture. I mean, just how they experience, how well care is delivered when you're like, oh, the equipment is like, it's delayed, half the time we need it, to, a much, much lower percentage. I mean, there's also a lot of turnover that's going on right now, just because, nurses are, frustrated at times related to their ability to do their job. And so, not having delayed equipment, keeping keeping everything on time. That is so important. And that is not a small improvement. That is a significant improvement.
It's huge. And, it goes beyond the clinicians too. So not only did the clinician experience improve dramatically, but the equipment utilization and availability improved too. So when we think about the impact of that, the equipment is being utilized more fully. It's not sitting around. Therefore, you don't have to own as much equipment, right? So we can make it much more efficient, high utilization, high turn on that. So the next time you need to make a capital budget request, right? It's for less equipment because there is such a great process making sure that it's where it's needed to be at all times.
Do you find this is true as well? And it's really around when equipment is not getting serviced and maintained adequately. And so that inventory may be down because you don't have as much in circulation. It seems like, there are some shortcuts that get made to keep what limited inventory you have in play. But then also it's just getting used more and more and more. So then the wear and tear, like you can get into this vicious cycle where if you don't have the adequate inventory that's all in circulation, the equipment that you're leaning on is also more likely to then go down, and you can never break through sort of, getting back to a place where everything is, pretty much on uptime.
That's right. And oftentimes what happens, this is kind of an aha moment for us when we have a customer that's renting a lot of equipment. It may be that there's just this backlog sitting in biomed, or it may be indicative of a management process that isn't working in the best way. But it's funny because, for us to say, well, we don't want the rental. We do, right? But we want to be the good rental company where we're actually supplementing good rental. And when that rental spend gets way too high for what we see nationally, it's time for a conversation with our customer to say, what else is going on here? Because typically when there's excessive rentals, something's broken. And usually that something is something that we can help with as well.
All right, we're going to tie this up in a nice little bow before we wrap up for our supply chain audience. Give us several takeaways, of benefits to supply chain for working with you and your team, on this program to really help better manage their equipment.
Totally. I think right now, especially right now, right, as supply chain is considering investments in potentially a respiratory fleet, an infusion fleet, in whatever, beds, etc., we can be a consultative partner in that. We don't care how much you go buy. That's really not a concern for us. And so we can help you understand how much you should buy if you have an optimal management process. So getting us in the game with you can be beneficial to lower that capital burden that ultimately is going to come. We also can help make sure that if you don't want to spend the capital, that we can potentially look at a program where we do the capital investment for the hospital and take away that burden of ownership that exists. So again, in that model, we bring the capital, we bring the management, and we bring the maintenance. So full circle end-to-end life cycle management of that equipment to sort of alleviate the hospital of having to take on those burdens. So if the hospital also is hearing, and this is the time where you're going to hear it, right? From the clinicians, from the other departments saying, hey, we need more equipment, rather than just write the check, that's another reason to bring us in. There may be something that we can uncover, that we can investigate to figure out if you need some sort of enhanced management of your equipment and to solve something that isn't a cookie cutter, right? But taking the best practices from what we do across the country and applying it specifically to the need of that particular hospital.
Phenomenal, Jeannie, phenomenal. So download this case study because it is really impressive, the improvements that have been made. You can visit their website, agilityhealth.com, follow them on LinkedIn, and definitely talk with a local equipment specialist to see how Agility may be able to help you during census spikes, unplanned events, or through an on-site program. And you can just contact them through the website. Jeannie, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. You've really laid this out very well, and you've got a reputation for doing great work and consulting with customers. And so I want to commend you on that. And thanks again for coming on Power Supply.
Appreciate it. Great talking with you, Justin.
That was Jeannie Spoden, Vice President of Medical Technology Management Solutions at Agility. And they are the leader in providing medical equipment rental from infusion pumps, ventilators, to specialty mattresses and beds, to hospitals across the U.S. And as she mentioned, UHS was the first to do this. They've been in business for over 80 years, and they take a very consultative approach, especially this time of year. It's flu and COVID season. You're going to have spikes. You're going to probably have demands for more respiratory equipment, such as vents, and they can be a great partner to help you navigate this time of year. The case study, I want to highly encourage people to download it. Some of the stats, as she mentioned, increasing nursing satisfaction to 97% related to equipment management, giving them time to the patient at the bedside, and also reducing equipment delays from 40% to 7%. That is astonishing. For those of you in supply chain, that is going to decrease the noise coming from the clinician. It's also going to reduce the need to find very limited available capital to be spending on this equipment. And hopefully you'll have plenty of happy clinicians. Go to their website, agilityhealth.com. That's AGILITI health.com. Follow them on LinkedIn, and then you can go right onto the website and request to speak with a local equipment specialist to see how Agility may be able to help you during times with census spikes, unplanned events, or if you're interested in developing an on-site program with them. So a big thank you to Jeannie for joining me today, and that's going to do it for this Vendor Spotlight on Power Supply.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.